What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and with the NFL draft wrapping up a few days ago, I'm assuming most of you guys are gearing up for your fantasy football rookie drafts. And when people are prepping, to head into their rookie drafts, a lot of people spend a lot of time focusing on the players. They look at rankings. You really want to lock in what player you're going to get at your draft spot, and that's definitely very important. You obviously want to pick great players for your fantasy team, but it's also pretty important to look at where you're drafting, where the strengths are in each different class, because every year is going to be different, right? Some years you're going to have a lot of depth throughout the first round. Some years it's going to be super top heavy. If you're able to locate, where the value is in different rounds, it really helps you kind of move your pick around, maybe trade up in a certain spot, trade back in a different area. So that's what we're focusing on in this video. We're going to look at the rough ADP we have so far from fantasy drafts, kind of figure out where the value is, and maybe it helps you guys make some trades, trade up in certain spots, trade back in others. And so let's just dive right into it. We're going to start off by looking at how the ADP is currently shaking up. So you can see on the left side, you have their ADP, and then on the right side, I kind of have a tier list on where these guys are currently going in drafts. This could change a little bit, but a few days after the draft, I feel like this is a pretty decent idea. So let's just run through that ADP real quick. We have a pretty clear top 1 and 2 in this class. The first 2 picks are very likely going to be Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. More likely than not, it's going to be Caleb at the 101. This obviously is super flex, keep that in mind, but the top 2 picks are almost always Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. in whatever order. And then it also looks like we're seeing a pretty clear 3-4, with that being Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors. These guys could be flipped 3-4, but they're pretty consistently going, either at number 3 or at number 4. And then we have this tier of 4 players going from pick 5 through 8. And they're kind of close together. There's going to be a lot of variance draft to draft. That's going to be Rome Odunze, Drake May, JJ McCarthy, and Brock Bowers. What's kind of interesting about this tier is that in my personal rankings, I have May, McCarthy, Bowers just shifted up one spot, and then I have Rome Odunze towards the bottom of that tier. But you can see the public actually favors Rome Odunze here in this spot. Then looking at the late first, you have Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, and Jonathan Brooks. Looking at the early second-round picks, Bo Nix, Keon Coleman, Trey Benson, Michael Penix Jr. Mid-second round, a lot of wide receivers here. A.D. Mitchell, Ricky Pearsall, Xavier Legette, Blake Corum, Troy Franklin. Late second, Jalen Polk, Roman Wilson, Jalen Wright. Then we're getting into early third, Marshawn Lloyd, Jatavian Sanders, Malachi Corley, Ben Sinnott, Jermaine Burton. And then the rest of the third, Bucky Irving, Spencer Rattler, Brendan Rice, Jalen McMillan, Javon Baker, Braylon Allen, and Luke McCaffrey. So those are the current tiers based on ADP. And I want to start off by talking about, some different trends I've noticed just based on where this class stacks up after the draft. So I think post NFL draft, late first round picks and early second round picks have gained a lot of value. Heading into the draft, I really thought like the early second round area, even like the 111, 112 area, I thought it would be a little bit thin, especially if we didn't get a ton of great landing spots and if we didn't get some of those quarterbacks going round 1 that were kind of on the bubble, a few days before the draft. But I think the draft really did hit for the players in that range. You had wide receivers like Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, and Keon Coleman. All those guys landed really strong landing spots while also getting really nice draft capital. You had Jonathan Brooks go in the mid-second round to the Panthers. Great draft capital for a running back. Also a decent landing spot with workhorse upside. And then both the quarterbacks went in the top 12. I mean, a few days before the draft, there was no guarantee that either of those dudes were going round 1. You end up getting Penix at 8, obviously with the weird landing spot situation, but still great draft capital. And then Bo Nix going at number 12 means he's definitely a player in like the late first, early second round. So I think that area gained a lot of value. And then on the other side, I think the late second round and early third round kind of lost value. Outside of Jonathan Brooks, getting the nice capital and the nice landing spot, the other running backs that could have been going day 2, early day 3, a lot of the landing spots honestly just disappointed. You kind of had that tier with Corum, Jalen Wright, Marshawn Lloyd, and they all kind of got drafted to like committee situations, not super appealing landing spots. There wasn't a running back that went to the Cowboys, which was kind of like the dream landing spot for a running back prospect. Troy Franklin, who also could have been in that range or even earlier on, He goes day 3, so he falls. And then pre-draft, there was also talk about Spencer Rattler potentially going day 2. If he did go day 2, you definitely could have considered him in this area. But with him going day 3, definitely out, at least in my opinion, from like the late second, early third round range. So I think late first, early second gained value. I think late second, early third lost value. And now let's look into which specific areas I'd be trying to get into if I was, trying to trade my draft pick. So heading into the NFL draft, I really liked the top 8. I thought there was a pretty clear consensus top 8, and I still honestly like the idea of getting into that tier. I do think there's a drop off from the Odunze, May, McCarthy, Bowers tier to like Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., even though those guys have solid landing spots, and I think they're fine picks. Like, I think they're going where they should at the back end of the first round. I do just think there's a drop off. I mean, having May and McCarthy there, very strong quarterback prospects. May not with a great landing spot, but a pretty top tier quarterback prospect. McCarthy, maybe not viewed as highly as a prospect, but he has a great landing spot. Brock Bowers, a generational tight end talent. And then Rome Odunze, I just think is a straight up better wide receiver prospect than the other guys in the tier. And I do think there'd be willing trade participants to kind of move out of that, pick 6, pick 7, pick 8 area, potentially move back in the first round. I think there's, some controversy with a few of the players in this tier. I feel like May, McCarthy, and Bowers all have people that are kind of fading them at this point. I feel like that's what's kind of pushing Odunze up. For Drake May, I think people don't like the landing spot, which, is fair. The landing spot's not great, but I think people are souring on him a little bit. For JJ McCarthy, the landing spot is great, but I think there's a lot of people out there who just aren't believers in him as a prospect. And then for Brock Bowers, I think everyone thinks Brock Bowers is a great prospect, but a lot of people really, really hate this landing spot and think it's just going to kill his fantasy value. So I could see people not wanting to choose between one of those options if they're picking 6, 7, or 8. Maybe they want to move back, get a little something on top of it, and I'd be willing to give up like a later round pick. You could end up giving up like a late third, maybe even like a 4th round pick to move up a spot or two, but if you're getting into that top 8, I think it makes a lot of sense, and it might not take, a lot of assets to make that move. If I am picking in that like late first area and I'm not able to jump into the top 8, I'd also honestly be willing to move back to like the 201, the 202 if I'm able to get something on top of it. I think, getting a guy like Jonathan Brooks to fall there, Bo Nix to fall there would be interesting. I mean, Bo Nix is kind of going there consistently, and it wouldn't be crazy for Brooks to go there. And then I think like any wide receiver from Worthy to Coleman when we're looking at the ADP, I think are just really nice values if you're drafting at the 201, the 202. In my rankings, at the 203 is where I have Michael Penix ranked, but like even though I have him there, I really wouldn't want to pull the trigger on him at the 203. I'd probably want to trade out of that spot. So 201, 202, I just think there's 14 players that I'd be comfortable taking with either of those picks. And then now moving into like the mid-second round territory, I'm not a huge fan of the mid-second round. I think guys like A.D. Mitchell, Ricky Pearsall, and Xavier Legette, I think they're fairly priced. Within that same area, I have no interest in drafting Blake Corum or Troy Franklin there. But even though I think some of those wide receivers are fairly priced, like if I could try to move up, I would, definitely want to do that. But if I have to take those guys, I'd be fine taking them. I honestly thought, specifically Pearsall and Legette, I thought they'd be going a little bit earlier on, just based on them going in the first round. But it seems like people are, kind of in line, at least with how I'm viewing those players. And then, I was shocked to see Troy Franklin here. I thought I was going to be high on Troy Franklin even after he fell. But honestly, for me, the day 3 draft capital knocks him out of my top 24. He was my wide receiver 6 heading into the draft, was very high on him. But I, can't rationalize spending a mid-second round pick on him at this point after what happened in the draft. And then for Blake Corum, mentioned how I wouldn't want to pick him here either. I think Blake Corum, Jalen Wright, and Marshawn Lloyd are in the same tier for me. So I'm not picking Blake Corum mid-second round when you have a dude like Marshawn Lloyd who's going in the early third. I'll just take whatever dude out of those guys is cheapest, when I'm on the clock somewhere at like the 2-3 turn area. So I'd much rather spend that price than like a mid-second round on Corum. And then I'd be interested in trading back or up wherever you are in drafts to the early third round. Even though I think that spot lost value, I think, there are some interesting options that could be on the board, and it might be cheaper to acquire that spot than before the NFL draft. But I think if you're picking at like the 301, 302, you could have the option for one of those running backs like I mentioned, Corum, Wright, Lloyd. I also think you could have Sinnett, the tight end, available at that price. I'd be willing to take him as early as like the late second round area. I think he's like my 22nd ranked player. So that's kind of where I'm at with Sinnott. He honestly might be 20 to 22, somewhere in that range. And then also, like, you could get hit with a falling Jalen Polk in that area. So those are kind of my initial thoughts here on where the value lies in this draft. I still like the top 8. I also kind of like the 201, 202 area. If you're in that like late first range, you have the opportunity to move up, move back. If you're in like the mid to late second round and someone really wants those picks, I would not be upset, moving out of them. If you want to get into like that early third territory, I think there's a nice sweet spot where you can get some value falling to you. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you guys have any like trade questions you want to run by me, I'll make sure to respond back to you in the comment section. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.